Hello, my name is Dr. Charles Durr, and I've been practicing chiropractic here in Downingtown, Pennsylvania for the last 12 years with my partner, Dr. Joseph Childs. And for the purposes of this tape, it's important to understand that I am certified in functional blood chemistry analysis, which is a nutritional approach to health rather than a drug approach to disease, and I'll get into that a little bit later. But I'm here to talk to you about our diabetes program. But before I do that, I want to expound on some scary statistics when it comes to our country's health. 1 in 2 people will die of heart disease. 1 in 2 will develop some form of cancer. 1 in 3 will develop diabetes. 1 in 3 will become clinically depressed. 1 in 6 couples are infertile. 1 in 6 kids have a neurological condition, and so on and so forth. Now, we have never been sicker. And here's some even worse news. In 1997, the USA ranked 34th in healthcare. In 2000, 37th. In 2007, 48th. In 2009, we are 50th. We rank number 41 in life expectancy, and yet we spend more in healthcare than any other country in the industrialized world. And we are not number 1. Something has to be wrong. Right? Now let's talk specifically about diabetes. Diabetes prevalence is diagnosed and undiagnosed in the country of all ages in 2007. It's estimated at 23.6 million people, or 7.8% of the population has diabetes. Diagnosed 17.9 and undiagnosed 5.7 million people. That's a staggering amount. Right? Type 1, it's been estimated that yearly incidence of type 1 diabetes developing at 3.7 to 20 out of 100,000. More than 700,000 people in America have type 1 diabetes, and that's about 10% of the people. 90% of the people with diabetes have type 2 diabetes. All right. Type 2 statistics, 23.6 million in the United States, 1 in 3 go undiagnosed. Right? Leads to the #1 cause of kidney failure in the United States. 60 to 70% of diabetics have some form of peripheral neuropathy or death of the nerves in their feet and hands. And last but not least, of those, 60 to 70% most have some sort of sexual dysfunction. Now, type 2 diabetes is a progressive disorder that begins with peripheral insulin resistance and ends with failure of the pancreatic beta cells. All right? And in type 2, previously called insulin dependent or diabetes mellitus, it's caused by insulin resistance, which is a decrease in uptake in the cells, decreased insulin secretion, a problem with your pancreas, or excessive production of glucose from the liver, which is a problem in and of itself. Now, some of the symptoms of early stage or pre-diabetes is what's called insulin resistance. One of the #1 symptoms is fatigue after meals. So if you get tired after you eat, there's a chance that you're developing pre-diabetes. Right? If you have trouble losing weight, frequent urination, and increased thirst and appetite. Now, some other symptoms: hypoglycemia, which is the opposite of insulin resistance. So insulin resistance is high blood sugar, hypoglycemia is low blood sugar. But frequently, diabetes or insulin resistance starts as hypoglycemia, which is a problem stabilizing your blood sugar. And that's the symptoms of low blood sugar include shakiness, hunger, sweating, headaches, rapid heartbeats, changes in mood, changes in vision, and you get energized after meals. If you get irritable and shaky before you eat, and you feel better after you eat, you have hypoglycemia. If you get tired after you eat, you have insulin resistance. Either one is not a good thing, and both are precursors to diabetes. Right. A news update, September 2010, Avandia, right, recalled in UK, and there's serious side effects of that medication. So just artificially lowering your blood sugar with medication leads to a lot of complications. Basically how those medications work is they force an already fatigued and dying pancreas to work harder by chemically manipulating it, actually like taking a whip to it, until it eventually burns out and you require insulin secretions or insulin injections. Right? So the progression, your receptor cells become resistant to insulin. That's because of increased dietary intake and say stress and cortisol. We'll get into that in a little bit. Increased production of glucose, increased lipolysis, so you see your triglycerides going up. So if you have high blood sugar, you have high triglycerides, and you have high cholesterol. If your triglycerides are equal to or about 70% of your total cholesterol, the reason you have high cholesterol is because of a sugar problem, most likely pre-diabetes or insulin resistance. So you don't need to treat the cholesterol, you need to treat the diabetes, or the pre-diabetes, or the insulin resistance to get the cholesterol down. To compensate for increased glucose, the pancreatic cells make more insulin, so you're putting a stress on your pancreas. Okay? Now, insulin is extremely inflammatory in the body. Okay? If it's used in proper controls, it's not damaging, but you have too much insulin, you create an inflammatory state within your body. The overabundance of insulin, like I said, causes inflammation. The pancreas can't keep up with the blood glucose increases, causing nerve damage. Too much sugar forces out oxygen. Not enough oxygen, nerves die. Right? And the pancreas beta cells die and then become insulin dependent. Like I said, you wear your pancreas out. It just can't keep up, and it actually dies. All right? The problem, in our current system of treating, preventing diabetes with success, why are more and more people developing it? You have to think about that. We spend more on drugs, we take more drugs, people are taking all these diabetes medications, yet it keeps increasing. Type 2 diabetes is no longer called adult onset because so many children are developing it. And infant and adolescent obesity is extremely on the rise in our country. And only people getting rich off this are the drug companies, unfortunately. And we need a new approach. Right? So what makes us different from every other doctor that you've seen? You get tired after you eat. You have high blood sugar. You have triglycerides. You have high cholesterol. You're overweight. And you're on 3 or 4, maybe 6 medications. Why what we do is going to help you versus what this drug approach is going to do? Well, let's get into that. All right? We treat type 2 diabetes metabolically and neurologically. All right, so let me elaborate on that. We leave no stone unturned when it comes to getting the root cause of your diabetes. So the first thing we do is a very, very good, thorough metabolic analysis. And we use a complete blood count. All right? Now, traditionally, you get a CBC with differential, you get a lipid panel, you get a Chem7 or something along those lines, and maybe a TSH. Right? In our blood chemistry analysis, we use a more expansive amount of tests. So our complete blood count will probably be twice as extensive as your traditional one you get at your family checkup. Right? So we want to look at the chemistry patterns and see exactly what's occurring there. We also do a thyroid panel that's about 7 different tests plus a couple of autoantibodies. Now, the thyroid can be involved with diabetes because it controls the rate of metabolism of the pancreas and the liver. So if you have a sluggish liver or pancreas, then you can also develop diabetes. So we have to look at the thyroid as maybe an underlying marker. And more importantly, the thyroid antibodies. So if you have positive antibodies, your body's attacking your own thyroid gland in some way. It's an indicator that you might have an autoimmune disease. That indicates you might also have an autoimmune attack on your pancreas as well. So this panel will give us some very good thorough screening to head off things before they become full-blown problems and to get to the bottom of the issue. Right? Now, we use what's called a functional blood chemistry range. Now, I'm certified in functional blood chemistry analysis, and what that means is we use a tighter standard. So when you get your traditional blood work, you see your numbers and if they're out of range. Okay? That laboratory range is based on a broad bell curve. That's the average of everybody who gives blood. Sick people, well people, and everybody in between. A functional blood chemistry analysis is based on all the healthy people who give blood. And so what some clinical chemists did and some functional medicine doctors do is they study the people who have no diseases, no medications, no obvious health problems. And they take their blood and they take the averages for those people and we come up with what's called a functional average. And this is where a healthy person should be. All right, so let's talk about the difference there. And so you see abnormally low or abnormally high. That's what you get on the traditional blood work. And these are like the idiot light on your car. By the time your oil light goes on, you're about 2 quarts low. Well, wouldn't it be more prudent to see when you're a half quart low to add more before it becomes a damaging effect on your engine? Well, the same thing with functional blood chemistry. We look at the patterns in a tighter ratio to detect dysfunction before it becomes disease. Right? So, for example, glucose. Our range is 85 to 100, and typically the pathological or the laboratory range is between 65 and 100, some cases 110. If you are below 85 in your blood chemistry and you're below 70, you are going to feel lousy. You're going to be shaky, jittery, irritable, and according to the pathological credentials or even your family doctor, you would see no problem with that. Okay, so we use a tighter range to develop patterns that identify problems before they become full-blown diseases. Right? Now, some causes of sensitivity or insulin resistance. Excess cortisol. Cortisol is secreted by your adrenal glands. They sit on top of your kidneys. And when you're under a lot of stress, cortisol is overproduced. Okay? Cortisol in excess is toxic to the brain. It slows its function down. It can slow down the pituitary gland. It can slow down the thyroid gland. And it can cause extracellular resistance to insulin. All right? Poor diet and lifestyle. a number one. Let's face it, if you're drinking 32 ounces of sugary drink, a Big Mac and fries, you're going to have excess sugar and excess fat in your body. Your body's going to be under a tremendous amount of strain to try and bring that sugar under control. So most of the time, type 2 diabetes is completely a lifestyle disease, and it's caused by just eating poor foods, refined carbohydrates, and fast foods, processed foods, things along those lines. All right. Another thing is lack of exercise. So when you exercise, you use the metabolites of carbohydrate. Okay, your body needs sugar or its metabolically active glucose to run yourself, to exchange oxygen and run your muscles and so forth. So being a couch potato is a number 2 cause of type 2 diabetes. Stress. Stress can cause it because stress causes excess cortisol. It messes up your brain chemistry, it messes up your thyroid, and it messes up your digestion. So stress which is epidemic in our society. So how many people, like yourself maybe, are a couch potato, you don't exercise, you eat bad, and you're under a lot of stress? Well, you're going to get diabetes sooner or later, unfortunately, unless you do something. Right? Now, food intolerances. And this is probably the number 1 thing that's ignored in modern medicine. Things that we eat, we may be allergic to. Okay, they may cause an autoimmune response in our body. And frequently it's gluten, milk, egg, soy, and yeast, what we call the big 5. But refined carbohydrates are a double whammy. They have loaded with gluten and the refined carbohydrates. So they put a tremendous strain on your blood sugar and your pancreas and your adrenal glands. And they may be causing an autoimmune response because of the proteins encased within the gluten or casein or what have you. Right? GI pathogens. So if you have parasites, bad bacterial overgrowth, yeast, fungus, all those things can cause a problem in your metabolism and a strain on your liver. Right? Viral infections, heavy metals, and poor brain function, like we talked about with your thyroid, can all be a contributor to diabetes, particularly type 2 diabetes. Right? Another thing we do is what's called an adrenal stress index. So we talk about stress and excess cortisol being a major factor in type 2 diabetes. Well, we do what's called an adrenal stress index, which is a salivary sample every few hours throughout a 24-hour period to measure your cortisol load. And at certain times of the day, like 3 in the afternoon, it should be at its highest. And at 3 in the morning, it should be at its lowest. So there are actually 7 patterns of adrenal maladaptation, as it's called, that we can identify with this test. And this test is useless in and of itself one time. What we do is a series of them to see how A, to rehabilitate the adrenal glands, and B, to see how the rehabilitation is coming along. So it's part of our workup. And this is a test for our diabetics. We do this frequently because the adrenal stress index is an indicator of adrenal health, which is an indicator of blood sugar management capacity. So if your adrenals are working well, your blood sugar capacity is at its best. Right? We also do sensitivity testing. I talked about the big 5, and this is IgG, not IgA, which is blood. It's very nonspecific. Right? It's in the stool where it's occurring. Digestion occurs in the gut, and the stool will be more sensitive to an immune reaction. So the big 5 are gluten, casein, egg, soy, and yeast. You must run this test. We identify food allergies, or what we call food sensitivities. It indicates that when you eat these foods, your body is mistaking those foods as a pathogen, like a virus or a bacteria. It's setting off an attack. It's identifying these proteins, and you have soldiers circulating your bloodstream constantly looking for these proteins. And as you keep ingesting, you build more antibodies and more antibodies. And unfortunately, frequently what happens is your immune system goes off the rails and starts mistaking those pathogens, those proteins from those foods, as your own tissue. So your thyroid might be coming under attack, or your pancreas, or your liver, or what have you, or your peripheral nerves for that matter. So if you have a food sensitivity, it's important we identify them and then remove them from the diet so we can get the body and the immune system to regulate itself. We also do DNA stool ecology profiles. So we have to see what type of health your gut's in, okay? Or are there not enough good bacteria for that, helping your digestion? Or are there too many bad bacteria? Is there yeast overgrowth? Is there fungus? Is there a parasite or 2 or 3 in some cases, what we find? If you have these in your gut, we need to remove them, okay, with medications or what have you, so that your gut function can return to normal. Right? If we can do this, we reduce the pathogenic or antigenic load. Right? So if you have antigens from food, if you have antigens from bugs, we have to reduce or remove them all so that your immune system can start to function better, and therefore your pancreas and your blood sugar can start to regulate itself. So this is another critical test that we run to identify antigens. Right? We do sensitivity testing, and if you're sensitive to foods, you may be experiencing the following: frequent pain and chronic pain and fatigue, frequent indigestion, fullness after meals, bloating after meals, frequent loose bowel movements, constipation, and even vomiting in some cases. A very big sign that you have a food intolerance or you have a pathogen in your intestinal tract. All right. Now we also do intestinal permeability test, or what's called leaky gut syndrome. So imagine you're eating these pathogens, or these antigens as we call them, from foods, and then you have overproduction of bad bacteria and some parasites in your gut. Right? This is going to cause a problem in and of itself. But frequently we have in our country an overabundance of leaky gut syndrome, which is the colander, which is your intestinal tract, is too big, and it's letting undigested proteins out into the bloodstream, right? Whether it be food or bugs or what have you. So if there's an overabundance escaping, the immune response is even worse than if you just are eating the antigens and you had a healthy, intact digestive tract. So one folder is the antigen overload, and another folder is the escape into the bloodstream, which then is easily identified by your immune system as an invader, which sets off the autoimmune attack and the cascade of inflammation that is so damaging to your body. Inflammation causes cellular destruction and cellular resistance of hormones like insulin and so forth. So we have to identify if you're having these problems at all. Right? So once we identify these problems, we then set upon a nutritional management of this condition with nutritional support and supplementation, and frequent blood works to follow up to see how things are improving. We look at blood sugar, we look at hemoglobin A1C, we look at triglycerides, cholesterol, and any number of tests to see how things are improving. So if this approach, a nutritional approach based on eating right, being more active, and taking strategic supplements to improve the metabolic functions of your body, to reverse or control your diabetes, then this is the place for you. Right? If you're not willing to make some changes in your lifestyle, which means eating and maybe some more activity down the road, then this isn't the program for you. But if you are, obviously you're watching this, you may have, or a friend has, diabetes of some sort. You can call our office, make an appointment. We will be happy to do a workup on you and see if we can help you. Until then, I wish you luck. Hope to see you soon.